The neighborhood had always been quiet. It was the kind of place where people waved when they passed each other and parked their cars in the same spots every day without thinking about it. Lawns were trimmed, sidewalks were clean, and nothing ever felt rushed. Most people moved there for peace. They wanted a place where life felt steady, where problems were small and solved with a simple talk. One homeowner had lived there for several years and never had trouble with anyone. He followed the rules, paid the HOA fees on time, and kept his property neat. He was not the type to argue or complain. He worked long hours, came home tired, and enjoyed sitting outside in the evening with a cup of tea, watching the sky change colors. To him, the house was more than walls and a roof. It was the place where he could finally breathe. The HOA had always been quiet, too. Once in a while, a letter would come reminding people to trim hedges or move trash bins after pickup day. Nothing serious. Most residents barely noticed the HOA unless it was time to pay dues. That changed when a new board member started making herself known. At first, it was subtle. A note appeared on the door one morning about the grass being a little too high, even though it had been cut just days before. The homeowner shrugged it off. Maybe the timing was bad. Maybe the person checking had come right before the mowing. He took care of it again and moved on. A week later, another letter arrived. This time it mentioned a trash bin being visible for too long. The homeowner read it twice, confused. The bin had been pulled in the same evening as always. He wondered if the HOA rules had changed. He checked the rule book online and saw nothing new. Still, he didn't respond. He didn't want to make a big deal out of something small. Then came the third notice. It claimed the front of the house did not match community standards. No photo. No clear reason. Just a warning that fines could follow if the issue was not fixed. That was when the homeowner felt something was off. He walked outside, looked around, and compared his house to others on the street. Everything looked the same. Same colors, same layout, same care. That evening, while he was checking the mail, a neighbor slowed down while walking their dog. They nodded toward the stack of papers in his hand and asked if the HOA was bothering him too. That simple question stuck with him. He asked what they meant, and the neighbor hesitated before speaking. They said things had changed since the new board member took charge of enforcement. She liked to keep things perfect, they said. But her idea of perfect seemed to shift depending on the person. Over the next few days, the homeowner started paying closer attention. He noticed the same person walking the neighborhood often, clipboard in hand, stopping to take photos. She would stare at houses for long moments, then write something down. When she reached his house, she stayed longer than usual. She frowned, snapped pictures, and shook her head slightly before moving on. Still, he stayed calm. He believed that if he kept following the rules, the situation would settle on its own. He had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Or so he thought. The first fine came the following week. It wasn't large, but it felt unfair. The letter claimed the homeowner had ignored previous warnings, which wasn't true. Each issue mentioned had already been addressed. The letter also had a tone that felt personal, almost mocking. It ended with a line saying, "Further action would be taken if compliance did not improve." For the first time, the homeowner felt uneasy in his own house. He reread the letter several times, trying to understand what he had done wrong. He considered calling the HOA office, but decided to wait. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it would be cleared up that weekend. He attended a small neighborhood gathering. People stood in groups, chatting casually. But when the topic of the HOA came up, voices lowered. Several neighbors shared similar stories. Sudden fines. Vague warnings. Feeling watched. Some had tried to speak up, but their concerns were dismissed or ignored. A few had given up and simply paid to avoid trouble. The homeowner listened quietly. He realized he wasn't alone. But he also noticed something else. The people who spoke the most were the ones who felt powerless. They were tired. They didn't believe anything could change. That night, instead of feeling angry, the homeowner felt determined. He went home and started organizing his paperwork. He printed out HOA rules, highlighted sections, and saved emails. He took photos of his property from different angles, making sure everything matched the guidelines. He wasn't planning a fight. He just wanted the truth on his side. Days passed and the notices continued. Each one felt more aggressive than the last. The HOA board members seemed to be testing limits, pushing a little further each time. She began sending emails directly, using formal language that sounded threatening. She mentioned inspections and possible legal steps if non-compliance continued. The homeowner replied politely, asking for clarification and proof. The response he received was short and dismissive. It didn't answer his questions. It simply repeated the warnings and restated authority. That was when he understood the problem wasn't his house. It was control. He started noticing how she spoke during HOA meetings. She talked over others, dismissed opinions, and framed her decisions as final. Anyone who questioned her was labeled difficult. Anyone who stayed silent was left alone. One afternoon, while returning from work, the homeowner found her standing near his driveway, taking photos again. This time, he walked up and calmly asked what the issue was. She barely looked at him. She said she was doing her job and that he should already know what was wrong. He asked for specifics. She responded with vague answers and reminded him of potential consequences. Her tone was sharp, confident, and cold. She walked away before he could say anything else. That moment changed everything. The homeowner realized that staying quiet would only make things worse. But instead of reacting with anger, he chose patience. He continued documenting. Every letter, every email, every photo. What the HOA Karen didn't know was that her plan depended on intimidation. She believed pressure would force compliance or silence. She believed no one would challenge her authority, but the homeowner was no longer afraid. He wasn't looking for revenge or drama. He just wanted fairness, and he was willing to wait. As the weeks went on, the neighborhood tension grew. More people started noticing what was happening. Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into quiet support. Still, no one stepped forward publicly. The HOA Karen grew bolder. Her messages became more frequent. Her rules more strict. She was certain she was winning. What she didn't realize was that every move she made was being carefully recorded. Every step she took was bringing her closer to a mistake she wouldn't be able to undo, and that was only the beginning. The homeowner woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose. The quiet fear that had lingered in the first weeks was fading. He still felt the tension, but it was replaced with focus. He knew that ignoring the HOA Karen any longer would only let her take control. Now, it was time to understand her motives and prepare for what might come next. He began by talking to neighbors more closely. Some had stories that were surprising. One neighbor explained how she had been fined for leaving a small garden tool out for just one day. Another had received letters about a paint color that had been approved for years. It became clear that the board member had her own personal rules, rules that didn't exist on paper. The more stories he heard, the more he realized this wasn't just about rules, it was about power. He decided to pay closer attention to her patterns. She was meticulous, always watching, always ready to take action. Sometimes she would drive slowly past houses. Sometimes she would stop mid-block to talk with other residents in a way that seemed more like reporting than casual conversation. He began noting the times she came around, the tone of her emails, and the issues she raised. Every little detail mattered. One afternoon, as he was doing yard work, the HOA Karen appeared again, seemingly out of nowhere. She claimed she had noticed something wrong with the alignment of his flower pots. He had arranged them in the same way for years. He calmly explained that nothing had changed, but she was insistent, waving her clipboard and pointing at rules that didn't exist. For the first time, he felt the audacity of her actions. She was testing him, trying to see how much she could get away with. Instead of reacting emotionally, he took photos and made notes. He wanted to have a clear record in case things escalated. Every interaction, every warning, every fine he documented. It became his shield, and while it seemed tedious, it gave him a sense of control that she clearly did not expect. Meanwhile, he began exploring the HOA bylaws in detail. He read every rule, every clause, every exception. The more he read, the more he saw gaps that protected homeowners and limited the power of the board. Many of the fines she issued were unjustified, based on rules that didn't exist. Others were exaggerated interpretations. He realized that if he had to, he could prove her actions were illegal or against the HOA's own rules. In conversations with other neighbors, he learned something troubling. The HOA Karen had been doing this for years, quietly, but no one had ever challenged her. Some homeowners had simply moved away rather than deal with her. Others paid fines to avoid conflict. A few had tried to push back, but her personality and tactics made them give up quickly. The homeowner noticed a pattern. She picked targets she believed were easy to intimidate. New residents, people who avoided conflict, or anyone who seemed likely to stay quiet. She avoided people who had experience with authority or who were outspoken, and he realized he might have been on her radar for longer than he thought. Not because of any mistake, but because she sensed he could be manipulated, or at least she wanted to try. One evening, he received a long email from her. It claimed violations of multiple HOA rules and threatened escalating fines and legal action. But this time, he didn't panic. He read it carefully, checked every claim, and found several contradictions. Some violations were about things he had corrected days ago. Others cited rules that were outdated or never enforced. He knew that responding hastily could make him look defensive, so he crafted a calm, detailed reply, asking for specifics and evidence. Her response was brief and dismissive. She repeated that he was wrong, threatened further action, and implied he was being difficult. The tone was aggressive, but he stayed calm. He printed everything, organized it, and added it to his growing record. He was building a strong foundation, brick by brick, for whatever might come next. As the days passed, he noticed that she was becoming impatient. Her tone changed in her emails, becoming sharper, almost careless. She was overextending herself, trying to enforce more rules at once, but the records showed inconsistencies. It was subtle, but he could sense a weakness forming. The homeowner also began quietly talking with more neighbors. He didn't lead conversations, but he listened. He discovered that many people felt powerless but were eager for fairness. They shared stories of fines, intimidation, and gossip that had hurt their peace. Hearing these stories confirmed his suspicion that her behavior was not just a personal quirk, it was a pattern. It could be challenged. One afternoon, he decided to attend the next HOA meeting. He prepared carefully, taking notes, printing documents, and rehearsing his points. He wanted to be calm and factual, not emotional. When the meeting began, the tension in the room was palpable. People watched silently as the HOA Karen presented her agenda, emphasizing rules and compliance. Her confidence was high. But the homeowner could see cracks in her approach. When his turn came to speak, he calmly asked for clarification on specific fines and rules. He presented his evidence in a straightforward way. He didn't attack her personally. He focused on facts. At first, she dismissed his points, trying to maintain control. But a few board members and neighbors noticed inconsistencies in her explanations. They began asking questions, subtle ones, but enough to show that her actions were not unquestionable. The homeowner left the meeting that night, feeling cautiously optimistic. He knew the battle wasn't over. The HOA Karen had a network of influence, and she could be persuasive. But now, she couldn't ignore him, and he had proof of her behavior. Over the next few weeks, the homeowner continued to document every interaction. Emails, photos, letters, even casual conversations became part of his record. He didn't post anything online or gossip. He was careful to keep everything professional. His goal was not revenge, it was fairness, clarity, and peace. He also noticed a change in the neighborhood. Some residents, who had been quiet or fearful, started observing the situation more closely. Some even asked him questions, seeking guidance. He realized that by standing up calmly and methodically, he was showing others that it was possible to challenge unfair behavior without conflict. Meanwhile, HOA Karen grew more erratic. Her attempts to intimidate became louder, but less consistent. She sent messages late at night, visited homes at odd hours, and made vague threats. The homeowner remained calm, never giving her the reaction she wanted. One morning, he received a certified letter. It was a formal notice claiming repeated violations and threatening fines up to thousands of dollars. He calmly reviewed it, cross-checked every claim, and noted discrepancies. Then he drafted a professional response, citing rules and providing evidence of compliance. He sent it to the HOA office and made sure to keep copies. For the first time, he felt the sense of control he had been building. He knew that the HOA Karen was overreaching. He had proof, witnesses, and knowledge of the bylaws. Her aggressive tactics no longer frightened him, they made him prepared at the same time. He realized that this situation was bigger than just him. It was about fairness in the neighborhood and holding authority accountable. If he handled it right, he could protect not only himself but others who had been intimidated in the past. The homeowner continued his routine, mowing his lawn, watering his garden, and keeping his home in order. But he did it with a new sense of awareness. Every action was documented, every interaction noted. He was patient, strategic, and calm. Little did the HOA Karen know. Her aggressive push was leading to a moment she couldn't control. Every step she took, every email, every fine, was now building the case against her. And soon, her plan to dominate and intimidate would begin to unravel in ways she had never imagined. The homeowner knew that the next phase would be challenging. She would try new tactics, more subtle threats, or public manipulation. But he also knew he was ready. He had the facts, the support of observant neighbors, and a steady mind. And so, life continued in the neighborhood. But behind the quiet lawns and trimmed hedges, a careful, patient battle was taking shape. The homeowner no longer feared the HOA Karen. Instead, he waited, prepared, and watched as her own actions began to show the cracks in her plan. This was the moment when the homeowner realized that the fight wasn't about rules, it was about truth, fairness, and the courage to stand firm when someone tried to bend the system for their own power. The weeks after the last HOA meeting passed quietly at first. The homeowner continued his routine, tending his garden, watering plants, and keeping the lawn neat. But there was an underlying tension in the neighborhood. The HOA Karen had noticed that he was no longer intimidated, and it unsettled her. She had built her reputation on control, and now one resident was refusing to comply with fear. That small act of independence challenged her authority, and she couldn't ignore it. Her first move was subtle. She began sending letters that were increasingly vague, filled with rules that seemed inconsistent, and in some cases, non-existent. She would claim violations without providing proof, leaving homeowners unsure of what they were being accused of. This tactic worked on many, but not on him. He carefully documented each letter, each claim, and even the absence of evidence. His meticulous records were becoming a shield he could rely on. Meanwhile, the homeowner observed her behavior around the neighborhood. She stopped to speak with others, always in a way that suggested she was gathering support, quietly telling residents that some people were not following the rules. It was a tactic meant to isolate him, to create doubt in the minds of neighbors. But the homeowner noticed a flaw. Her stories didn't always match reality. Those who knew him well could see the inconsistencies. Some began quietly questioning her motives. Then came a more direct escalation. She started attending community events more frequently, not to socialize, but to watch and document. She would sit at meetings, nodding at everything she heard, but making subtle notes in her clipboard. Her eyes would fix on him for a moment, and he could feel the intensity like a storm gathering. He didn't respond. He simply observed her in return, noting patterns and timing, knowing that every action could become evidence. One afternoon, she sent a notice claiming that a minor repair on his driveway was a violation. It was a small crack he had planned to fix months ago. He responded calmly, showing photos from before the crack had appeared and citing HOA bylaws that exempted minor repairs of this kind. She ignored his response and sent another notice the next day, escalating the claim to potential fines. By now, the homeowner understood that she was overextending herself. Her attempt to intimidate had become predictable. She was relying on aggression and repetition rather than facts. Each time she escalated, he countered calmly, relying on evidence and rules. Neighbors began noticing that her approach was no longer flawless. They whispered among themselves, some offering quiet support. Others simply relieved that someone was standing up to her. In the following weeks, the HOA Karen tried a new tactic. She spread rumors about him in the neighborhood, suggesting he was difficult, non-compliant, or even dishonest. It was a subtle form of character attack designed to isolate him further, but he remained unshaken. He kept records of every communication, every interaction, and quietly observed who supported her claims and who questioned them. He realized that truth was on his side. He also started reaching out to professionals, consulting with a lawyer familiar with HOA rules and local regulations. The lawyer explained which rules were legally enforceable and which were not, helping him understand the limits of her authority. This knowledge gave him confidence. He wasn't just documenting for his own protection, he was preparing to hold her accountable if necessary. The HOA Karen, sensing resistance, became bolder. She sent formal notices directly to him, sometimes threatening legal action, other times insisting on inspections at unusual hours. One morning, she arrived unannounced, claiming she needed to inspect theft property immediately. The homeowner calmly informed her that inspections had to be scheduled according to HOA bylaws and that he would comply at a proper time. She left frustrated, and he noted the encounter in his growing record. Neighbors began to notice her behavior more clearly. Some approached him quietly, sharing their own experiences with her. They described fines, vague rules, and personal intimidation. These stories painted a pattern that the homeowner could use if the situation escalated legally. He realized that he was no longer alone, that the neighborhood's eyes were watching and that her tactics were losing effectiveness. At the next HOA board meeting, the tension was palpable. She presented her usual list of issues, confident that she could control the room, but the homeowner had prepared carefully. He presented his documentation, calmly pointing out inconsistencies and violations of proper procedure. Other board members, who had once trusted her judgment without question, began asking questions. She grew flustered trying to defend herself, but her explanations were inconsistent. The homeowner noticed a subtle change in the room. Those who had once nodded in agreement with her were now listening carefully, some even leaning forward to see the documents he had brought. His calm, factual approach was creating doubt about her credibility, and for the first time she realized that her usual tactics were no longer effective. In the following days, she tried different strategies to regain control. She sent more letters, some threatening fines, others making vague claims about community standards. But he responded consistently with calm, well-documented replies. Each response reinforced his position, demonstrating that he was compliant and prepared. His methodical approach began influencing other residents. They saw that one person could stand up to intimidation without anger, without breaking rules, and without creating conflict. Some began quietly observing their own situations, realizing they might also have been treated unfairly. The homeowner's approach was showing them a path forward. The HOA Karen, increasingly frustrated, made a critical error. In an attempt to assert control, she cited rules that were outdated and unenforceable. She sent notices that directly contradicted the bylaws, assuming that people would be too intimidated to challenge them. The homeowner, however, had already familiarized himself with every relevant rule. He responded with precise references, highlighting the contradictions, and politely requested correction. This time her response was defensive. She sent emails that were shorter, sharper, almost aggressive in tone. Her confidence was cracking, and it was noticeable to anyone who read her messages. The homeowner realized that patience and preparation were turning her own tactics against her. Every threat, every attempt to intimidate, was now evidence of overreach. He also began documenting conversations with neighbors, not to involve them unnecessarily, but to note the support he was quietly receiving. Witnesses could confirm that. Her claims were exaggerated, inconsistent, and sometimes false. This network of observation added weight to his position, showing that the problem was not isolated. Then came the day of the unexpected inspection. She arrived early in the morning, claiming urgent need to assess a potential violation. The homeowner calmly informed her that he had prepared for a scheduled inspection according to HOA rules. She demanded entry, but he politely refused, citing the proper procedure. She left visibly frustrated, muttering under her breath, and he noted every detail. This incident marked a turning point, demonstrated clearly that her power was limited by rules, procedure, and observant neighbors. Her authority was no longer absolute, and her attempts to intimidate were now documented for potential review by other board members or legal authorities. The homeowner continued to live his life, tending his garden, maintaining his home, and interacting politely with neighbors. But behind the calm exterior, he was preparing for the next stage. He knew that the HOA Karen would continue to escalate, perhaps even try legal action or public manipulation. But he was ready. His documentation was thorough, his knowledge of the rules was strong, and he had quietly gained the support of neighbors who valued fairness. She attempted one final escalation that week, sending an urgent letter threatening legal action for alleged noncompliance with rules that did not exist. He calmly drafted a response, citing exact language from the bylaws, showing dates, photos, and records that proved compliance. He sent it with a copy to the HOA board and kept a certified copy for himself. For the first time, it seemed that the HOA Karen realized her control was slipping.
Ow.
Her aggressive posture was being countered at every turn, not with anger, but with facts and evidence. Her usual strategies, intimidation, vague claims, and personal attacks were ineffective against someone who remained calm, formed, and prepared. The homeowner reflected on what had happened so far. He realized that the battle was no longer about trivial rules or fines. It was about standing firm against unfair authority, about patience, observation, and methodical preparation. He had turned what could have been fear and frustration into focus and strategy, and he knew that the HOA, Karen's next move, would be her most desperate yet. She would try new tactics, more public manipulation, or perhaps an attempt to discredit him among neighbors or board members. But he was ready. His calm, consistent approach, backed by evidence and knowledge, had changed the balance of power. Life continued in the neighborhood, but now there was a quiet shift. Residents who had once feared her were beginning to notice the cracks in her authority. They saw that rules could be challenged respectfully, that intimidation could be met with calm and preparation, and that fairness could prevail without conflict. The homeowner remained patient, focused, and calm. He knew that every step he took was shaping the outcome, that every letter, every note, and every documented interaction was part of a larger story. He was no longer simply a resident under scrutiny, had become a symbol of measured resistance against unfair control. The HOA Karen's plan to intimidate and dominate was failing. She would soon face consequences she had not anticipated. The days after the last HOA meeting felt different. The homeowner could feel a change in the neighborhood, a quiet energy that hadn't been there before. People were more aware, paying attention to the interactions, noticing the way the HOA Karen behaved, and listening to the calm responses of the homeowner. He continued his usual routines, watering the garden, trimming hedges, and taking care of his home, but now he did it with a careful watchfulness, observing everything around him. The HOA Karen, meanwhile, had become noticeably agitated. Her usual confidence had begun to waver. She tried to send letters faster, issuing more fines in a shorter time. But the homeowner's organized responses made her efforts less effective. Each letter she sent was met with calm, factual replies, backed by evidence, photos, and references to the HOA bylaws. Neighbors began quietly noticing that her claims didn't always hold up, and whispers of doubt started to spread. One morning, she sent a notice claiming that the homeowner had violated multiple rules regarding his landscaping. The homeowner reviewed the claims carefully. Each accusation was either outdated or unfounded. He gathered photographs from past months, showing compliance with every rule. He also included notes from previous communications where she had confirmed his compliance. Then, he sent a detailed response to the HOA board, calmly explaining the inaccuracies and requesting corrections. The board's reaction surprised her. Some members, who had previously trusted her judgment completely, began asking questions. They wanted clarification about the alleged violations, the timing, and the evidence. For the first time, her actions were being scrutinized by others. The homeowner noticed the shift immediately. Her authority was no longer unquestioned. She tried to counteract this by speaking directly to neighbors, telling them that the homeowner was difficult and unwilling to follow the rules. She hoped to isolate him, to make others doubt his character. But many neighbors had already seen the letters, the emails, and the calm, precise way he handled each issue. They knew she was exaggerating or misrepresenting the facts. Quiet support for the homeowner began to grow. Meanwhile, the homeowner continued to prepare. He organized every interaction in chronological order, with copies of letters, photos of his property, and notes on each encounter. He even began keeping a record of neighbors who witnessed her actions or had similar experiences. This growing body of evidence was no longer just to shield it. It was a framework for exposing her behavior if needed. One afternoon, she attempted a bold move. She arrived unannounced, claiming that she needed to inspect his property immediately. The homeowner calmly reminded her of the HOA bylaws, which required scheduled inspections and proper notice. She argued, raising her voice, but he remained steady, explaining that compliance required following the proper procedure. She left frustrated, and he added the incident to his growing record, noting her tone, her behavior, and the lack of legal authority. That evening, he spoke with a few neighbors, quietly asking if they had noticed similar behavior from her. They shared stories of sudden fines, unjust warnings, and vague threats. The homeowner listened and documented their accounts, not for gossip, but to demonstrate a pattern of behavior. It became clear that she had been overreaching for years, and his calm resistance was shining a light on her action. The next HOA board meeting marked a turning point. The homeowner attended, bringing his organized documents and evidence. When she presented her agenda, listing alleged violations and fines, he calmly pointed out inconsistencies, errors, and violations of procedure. Other board members listened carefully, some leaning forward, asking questions that revealed flaws in her claims. She tried to respond with confidence, but her explanations were inconsistent. Her tone defensive. The homeowner noticed the subtle shift. Where she had once dominated the room, she now appeared unsure. Questions from other board members challenged her authority, and her attempts to assert control only highlighted the discrepancies in her approach. Neighbors attending the meeting quietly observed, some nodding in agreement with his factual responses. The balance of power was shifting in the following days. She attempted to regain control by sending urgent letters, threatening fines, and potential legal action. But the homeowner's careful documentation and calm replies continued to neutralize her efforts. Each response was precise, professional, and based on rules, leaving her without the leverage she needed. Neighbors began quietly supporting him more openly. Discussing their own experiences and sharing observations, she then made a critical error. In her frustration, she cited rules that were outdated, unenforceable, or misrepresented. The homeowner quickly pointed out the errors in writing, referencing official bylaws and including evidence of compliance. This time, she had no response. Her credibility was slipping, and the board members who had previously remained silent began questioning her. Judgment more directly. The homeowner also reached out to a lawyer familiar with HOA regulations, ensuring that every step he took was legally sound. He did not seek confrontation, but wanted to confirm that his records, responses, and observations would stand if a formal challenge arose. With professional advice backing him, his confidence grew, and his approach remained calm and deliberate. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had begun to take notice. Residents who had previously felt powerless were now observing how one person could challenge unfair authority respectfully and successfully. Conversations began to change from whispers of fear to discussions of fairness, rules, and accountability. The homeowner's actions had become an example, quietly empowering others. The HOA Karen, sensing her influence weakening, tried public manipulation. She spoke at small gatherings, emphasizing her role in maintaining community standards and portraying the homeowner as non-compliant. But the audience, aware of the documentation and the calm, factual approach he had maintained, was not easily persuaded. They noticed the inconsistencies in her story and the lack of evidence for her claims. Her mistakes continued to mount. One day, she sent a notice claiming the homeowner had violated a rule regarding exterior lighting. The homeowner responded with photos showing that his lighting had not changed for years and complied with all rules. He cited the specific language of the bylaws and included timestamps and witness statements. This time, even board members who had once supported her questioned the validity of her claims. By now, it was clear that her plan to intimidate had failed. Her aggressive tactics, exaggerated claims, and attempts to manipulate neighbors had been met with calm, consistent, and documented responses. The homeowner had turned her strategy against her, using facts, patience, and methodical preparation. Neighbors began reaching out more openly, sharing their experiences and supporting his factual approach. They provided accounts of previous fines, vague warnings, and intimidation tactics. The homeowner documented these stories carefully, creating a comprehensive record that demonstrated a clear pattern of overreach. The HOA Karen, frustrated and increasingly desperate, began making more visible mistakes. She sent notices without proper procedure, misquoted bylaws, and failed to respond adequately when challenged. Her attempts to regain authority only highlighted her inconsistencies and eroded her credibility further. Finally, the homeowner realized that the tide had truly turned. The neighborhood was watching. Board members were questioning her actions. And his calm, factual approach had exposed the flaws in her behavior. He continued to maintain his home, engage politely with neighbors, and document every interaction. Knowing that the final outcome would favor fairness and transparency, she had underestimated him from the start. Believing intimidation and fear would be enough to control the situation, but his patience, preparation, and dedication to facts had revealed her overreach. The balance of power in the neighborhood had shifted. The homeowner could see that the next steps would bring the resolution he had quietly worked toward. As life went on, the homeowner continued his routines, tending the garden, maintaining the home, and interacting with neighbors with calm confidence. The neighborhood, once quietly tense under her influence, began to feel a sense of relief. People noticed that rules could be challenged respectfully, that intimidation could be met with patience and evidence, and that fairness could prevail without conflict. The homeowner reflected on what had happened. He understood that the struggle had never been about minor fines or trivial rules. It had been about standing firm in the face of unfair authority, about using patience, observation, and methodical preparation to maintain control over his own life. His actions had created a ripple effect, empowering others and demonstrating that truth and fairness could overcome intimidation. The HOA Karen's mistakes had been exposed, her authority questioned, and her influence weakened. The homeowner's calm, factual approach had turned the situation around, showing that careful preparation and persistence could change the balance of power. And now, as he looked around the neighborhood, he realized that the final chapter was approaching. The resolution would come not from anger or confrontation, but from the careful, methodical work he had maintained all along. The neighborhood would witness fairness restored, and the HOA Karen's plan, once so confident, would finally unravel completely. The neighborhood felt different that morning. The air was quieter, calmer, but there was a sense of change. The homeowner woke up and went through his usual routine, watering the garden, checking the mail, and straightening the walkway. But today, he felt something he hadn't felt in months, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing patience. Preparation and truth are on your side. It had been a long journey. The past months had been full of tension, uncertainty, and frustration. Every interaction with the HOA Karen had tested him, pushed his patience, and challenged his focus. But he had stayed calm, documented everything, and relied on facts instead of emotion. Now, the balance of power had shifted, and the results were beginning to show. The first sign came in the form of a notice from the HOA board itself, not from her directly. It was a formal communication acknowledging that several of the previous fines and complaints issued by the HOA Karen were either incorrect or had not followed proper procedure. The language was careful, factual, and neutral, but the message was clear. Her claims had been overreaching, and the board had taken note. He read the notice slowly, taking in each sentence. This was not a victory he had forced with confrontation or anger. It was a result of steady documentation, calm replies, and methodical adherence to the rules. He felt relief, but also a deep sense of satisfaction. The process had worked. It turned intimidation into clarity and uncertainty into certainty. Neighbors began to notice the change as well. Conversations that had been tense or cautious became warmer and more open. People no longer whispered about unfair fines or vague threats. They discussed how the homeowner had handled the situation, sharing admiration for his calm and thorough approach. Some approached him quietly, offering thanks or sharing their own relief that fairness had been restored. The HOA Karen, sensing her influence slipping further, tried to assert herself one last time. She sent a final notice to a few residents, including the homeowner, threatening action over a minor technicality that didn't actually exist. The homeowner calmly prepared his response, just as he had for months. He cited the bylaws, included evidence of compliance, and politely reminded her that authority has limits. He sent the response with copies to the board and kept a copy for himself. By now, the board members were paying attention. They had seen the pattern of overreach, the repeated errors, and the calm, factual responses from the homeowner. They realized that her tactics were not just unfair, they were damaging the community's trust. At the next official board meeting, her actions were reviewed. She tried to defend herself, but the documentation, neighbor statements, and careful records left little room for argument. Her position was weakened, and the board began discussing consequences. Over the next few weeks, the HOA Karen's power continued to erode. She was removed from oversight of certain responsibilities and given formal warnings about compliance with HOA rules. Her ability to intimidate residents was restricted, and she could no longer act unilaterally. For the first time in years, her authority had limits imposed by the board itself. The homeowner continued his routine as always. He didn't gloat or celebrate loudly. Instead, he focused on small, personal victories, the way the flowers in his garden were growing, the fresh paint on his walkway, the peaceful morning air. These were signs that life